One can't mention emotion enough. Right. So again, emotion. So we talked about TA, TJ, and here's the other abbreviation with T, that's TTIP. And if you are living or located here in Germany, you are very much involved, at least in hearing this abbreviation in the public debate. TTIP stands for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the EU and the US, and that's an overall very comprehensive trade agreement which is recently negotiated and which is debated very critically here in Germany. That's not the case for all other European member states. For instance, in Poland, there's not so much, at least public opposing to this agreement like it's here. And what I very briefly would like to highlight a bit is why is such an agreement tackling TA? And I will do that for the case of food. So questions on food safety. We already heard about GMOs. And it's touching upon, in such an agreement, when you have different types of cultures and of designs of doing such a TA on food safety. For instance, here in Europe, GMOs can be forbidden, which is the case in Germany. It's again not in all European member states, making it very complicated, but it's allowed generally in the US. And if you have a free trade agreement, that means free trade, then these different types clash at the latest at the border. What standard is going to be applied? Are you allowed, as the EU, saying, no, I'm going to prohibit your imports? And actually, that's a problem within a trade agreement, because that means free trade. And all the welfare gains you maybe have heard about, which are calculated, rely on diminishing any type of barriers. So how can that actually be handled? First of all, there's a basic non-country or non-WTO country, let's say, WTO membership, which is the World Trade Organization, can just arbitrarily apply certain standards. There's a kind of basic rules which refers to technical assessment. The major idea of the WTO is not to protect a kind of technical safety or food safety, but is to avoid unjustified trade distortion. And the key word is, of course, unjustified. What does that mean? So the basic related to food is the Agreement on Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures, SPS agreement. Basically, it says each country may choose its own level of safety, whether it would like to have GMOs or not. It would like to have treated with chlorine treated chicken or not. So in principle, you have your own sovereignty. Now it comes the but. Your safety policy should be based on science. Science in the food safety area is called risk assessment. So TA is in this environment called risk assessment, following a complete or a very specific institutional frame. And what is expected as being science-based are reference standards, which have been developed by certain international organizations. Again, stupid abbreviations, doesn't matter. There exists a set of international organizations, basically by FAO and the World Health Organization, and they say, they provide a certain risk assessment saying GMO is harmful or not, or hormones up to that residual level is harmful or not. So this type of standards are seen as justified. You can deviate from these standards, but then you have, again, provide a convincing risk assessment, a convincing technical assessment on whether you would like to be stricter than certain international standards. There's one exception, a temporary exception, if you can prove there is not sufficient scientific evidence to prove at all whether there's a problem or not, then for a time-limited period, you may prohibit certain products on your market. What is interesting is there's a kind of open door because the risk assessment recommended here is not limited to pure scientific factors, but it says you should consider economic factors as well. So not only whether there is a kind of health problem, but maybe whether there's a kind of problem for your pork production, which is important in Europe. So this is a kind of broader understanding of risk assessment, let's say, already defined in the WTO. So, and then the next step is, what does that mean if I rely my policy decision on these standards? How may I implement this? And in principle, there is the whole spectrum of harmonization of standards between me and my trade partner, between the EU and the US. We all apply the same standards, we all approve GMO, or we all prohibit GMOs. And there are then other forms called equivalence or mutual recognition. And equivalence means that the exporter, so the US that want to sell to the EU, must prove, yes, my product has the same safety level internally than it's acquired here in the EU. So I have to prove that I'm equivalent to your standard. And that's actually done by complex lists for single products, like a positive lists, or can be the other way around, like by negative lists saying I allow it for any products coming from my trade partners, but for ABC, I'm not allowing it. The other, more complex approach is mutual recognition. That means I understand your whole regulatory system as being completely like in the same nature like my own. And I accept everything that is coming from your market. That is the approach internally in the EU. That's the internal market approach. We accept each other's settings, each other's types of assessing risks. Would like just to symbolize the different degrees of how to accept each other's types of risk assessments in the case of food, but it's more the general graph. And it starts by just keeping my own national standards, and the end would be harmonization. All trading partners have the same standards, and then there are these in-between forms. And if you now look for the example of the EU, we have already certain examples in place. The most loose one is just coordination. We talk about processes and try to narrow each other's. Is within the OECD countries, or as well from the US side within NAFTA. There's one step further already with the US implemented for animal products, so beef or eggs, since the end of 80s. That's the EU-US veterinary agreement. There you have, for positive listed products, the acceptance. Your eggs fulfill the same salmonella testing system like ours. Yes, you are allowed to export egg products to our market. Mutual recognition, as I've said, very complex. There you have, again, already one mutual recognition agreement in place with the US, which is on organic products. So there, both partners have agreed your organic controlling system, applying system, is the same like ours, and then we accept any organic product coming from each other. And then towards the final step of harmonization, as I said, that's the concept of the internal market within the EU, we have in between some rulings facing the EFTA, which is Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, which are quite near in their whole procedural system. So there, it's more than mutual recognition, but it's not completely harmonization. The same is at least targeted for the Mediterranean partner countries. This is just to show you, it's very, very seldom in trade agreements that we end up with harmonization. Why? Because there are so huge differences in concepts and as well in perceptions. Because of time, I just focus on one maybe. The first one is very much debated as well in the public. The guiding principle for any type of technology impact assessment in the EU compared to the US. In the EU, we have the precautionary principle, which is as well part of the EU's, let's say, constitution. It's part of the EU treaty. It's a real constitutional principle, meaning, briefly said, if a company cannot prove that there's no harm in a certain product, then the public authorities actually have the duty to prohibit it. And this is the opposite in the US, where the authority only can really interact if there's a proof of harmfulness. Thinking about new technology, thinking about GMOs, at least in the beginning, how could you really prove harmfulness or harmlessness? It's a problem. And the EU always says, okay, if there's a doubt, we prohibit it. There are very sophisticated approaches. It's just a general idea showing how different it is. The final point is important as well because it refers to the EU political sphere. In the EU, the whole policy from technical impact assessment for food to a final decision is very much politicized, leading sometimes to incoherence compared to the US. For instance, the case of GMOs, the case of treated chicken with chlorine. There, the scientific agency, which is EFSA, has stated there's no harm. It's no harm for human health for GMO and with slaughter treatment by chlorine. However, the political actors decided different from this risk assessment. And this is much more coherent in the US, and it's much more in line with the WTO approach, leading to the problem that the EU very often is claimed at the WTO and is losing the case because of this issue. What can one do is, there is in real existing trade agreements a lot of flexibility. What I would like to show you here is that in the system of equivalence, there's a huge degree of flexibility. Just to have it visualized, green means it's all between different trade partners and existing agreements, only for food, only for animal products. And green means accepting complete equivalence, which is a case a lot between the EU and New Zealand, but not between, for instance, EU and Canada on the left side, another agreement between EU and Canada, and then EU and USA. So green actually is a minor part always. Very often equivalence is completely excluded, saying, no, we are not going to accept each other's standards. That's the red parts. And the blue one, that means, again, not, yeah, we accept everything. We accept it only if you fulfill certain conditions. What I wanted to show with you here is it's not the case neither nor, and it's not the case that once EU and US implement or negotiate an agreement, everything is going to be accepted. That's, in history at least, all historical evidence shows it's not the case. So you can use these flexible degrees in agreements. And another idea as well, recently negotiated in the EU-US agreement, is use certain cooperation fora, like a body on sanitary and phytosanitary issues, to cooperate, to exchange your views, your concepts on how you fulfill risk assessment. And a final option, always being done and always have been implemented by the EU as well, is just keep your standard and make political bargaining. So we are not going to end up with hormone beef in the EU. However, then, vice versa, we accept that, for instance, the US is not going to import any raw milk dairy product like nice blue cheese from France. So this kind of political bargaining always was possible, meaning there's flexibility to end up by trading relation and still keep your own understanding of risk assessment and standard setting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bettina. Are there any questions from the panel, any remarks? If you've got one, very good, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bettina, I really enjoyed this. In my former life, I was a lawyer and trained in international economic relations, actually. So this is based on your own work, and I just would like to know, what is the quantitative level on this in these graphics? What does it mean? What is it, the count behind?
Sorry, I should have mentioned that. That's a number of regulations which are covered. So you must consider these type of agreements. It's very boring to read them, and that's the reason why hardly people are doing that. It's a huge list, and then you have stated here the EU, and here the US, and here the numbering of regulations we are talking about. And then you make a TTIP, regulation on marketing of egg products, brown egg products, blah, 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 very detailed. Yes, we accept it conditionally or not. And that's a number of regulation, not the number of products, but of regulation.
I see. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? It's not the case.
I have to have another one.
Sorry?
May I ask
Yeah,
another one?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yes.
A short question to Katrin. Yes, I have a question to Katrin. You defined two spheres of moralization of politics and politicization of ethics. I think it was very interesting. But can you say briefly some words about the relationship about moralization and politicization? How do they interact in your argumentation?
Right. Well, first they really have to be distinguished on a conceptual level, and often this is not the way I would wish for. And this is what I refer to in the Grunwald article, criticized, for instance. Yes, I'm telling names. The book by Alexander Wogner on ethicization, because there often what, in fact, in my words, would be moralization is called ethicization. So it's a bit difficult to really distinguish those concepts, and the way I wanted it to be was to say that ethics really, sort of the self-understanding is some kind of professional expertise in the wide sense. It's about reflection, and it tries and be very transparent on the grounds for the judgments that come out of it, so to speak. Whereas morals is what every one of us sort of, our own views on moral issues, how we should behave towards others, what our own good life would be like, and so on. So this is basically pre-reflective intuitions, pre-theoretic knowledge, and this is also uttered in the public sphere. And I guess that one understanding of RI is in fact to find out what do people actually think, and what would be uttered is sort of common morality views, our own moral views. So these are in the public sphere, and they are valuable. I'm not saying that they are not valuable, because we really need to know what people think, what their fears are, what their emotions are, and so on. But these are not theoretic in the sense that ethicists try and produce sort of reflective knowledge, and they try and offer frameworks, theoretical frameworks, and have sort of epistemically valuable judgments that they can give reasons for. So that's different propositions or different views being uttered, and they are both in the public sphere, and they, in a TG model, somehow sort of they fly around and compete with each other, and they can all impact policymakers, be they public or private. And that, for me, in the end, is an open question. I don't have a theory on how to integrate them, but I guess that for professional philosophers, there is a role to go on and utter and leave the ivory tower and make their reflective knowledge be heard. And I think the talk just before on aging was just a very good example. I mean, that's compatible with this view, where in TA, a lot of ethical foundations were being uttered, and it was actually what is technology good for and what are the problems and concerns and so on. But at the same time, we have moral views in the public sphere, and these also, they need to be sort of distilled in a scientific way, and this is what I guess social scientists work on. So we need to know what are people's concerns, and is there any reasonable answer to that? We don't want to persuade anyone, but maybe there are instances where actually people can change their moral views and become and have other convictions when they start thinking about them. So that's really competition of views.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for all of your comments, and I would like to close the session with some remarks. I think, we will have a few crucial points in future. That is food, that is aging, that is, for instance, also transport. There are things. Well, I'm working as a trainer and consultant for leadership up to top management and technological developers companies. So there are terms. That is, one term is the intended use, and another term is the accepted misuse. And these are terms that deal with the problem of responsibility. What is your responsibility as a manufacturer? Responsibility and the term of warranty also. So I think there are things coming up to us in future. When I think of autonomously driven cars, we will have them in, I think, a few years. And there are things we need ethics, of course, and I think we have seen today a few approaches how we can deal with it, but we have to think very much more from the bottom line. How can we deal really with technology? And so when I started 20 or 25 years ago in technology assessment, I have written other things from a theoretical point of view about innovation. Today I would say nobody wants IRI, and this is irresponsible research and innovation. And so maybe we can ask from that point of view, what is irresponsible, to define what can be responsible research and innovation. Okay, thank you for attending this session, and we see you at lunch or in the next session, in the plenary session, in the closing session. Yes, thank you.